as promised, we are starting with inflammation. So first and foremost, I have, I'm using my daughter's genetics, so y'all will know her whole genetic life by the time we're done. But I'm using this as an example. She's 17 years old, and in here, I made her a little thing that says Alex's genetics. This is the molecular report that you're gonna get. It has a green cover. Talked about that in my previous video. This is the bedrock report that you fill out. So it has a gray cover, it's a PDF, and you go through and you're going to highlight what is, like here I just circled them. So you can circle and highlight what is shown in your molecular report and pair it up, and then we give recommendations for lifestyle and diet. And then this is the third one. This is the newest report. This is called our GAP report. You'll actually go to the website, post it in the second day of the gene series, and put the results from this report into the computer, and it will spit out this report. So we're going to talk about what is shown in inflammation. So if you go to your very first page of your molecular report, after it says welcome, right? And then you have a table of contents, and then the first content page, the very first thing at the top talks about inflammation. Now hers is standard. Mine is high. When we put this into your assessment, what it's going to do is increase the amount of omega-3s in your nutrition, but it's much, much more than that. So this means you have a higher propensity towards inflammatory issues than someone who didn't have those genetic SNPs. But we're actually looking at 4 genes, not 1. So the very first gene that we're going to look at, and if you go to page 24 in your molecular report, it's going to outline that. So I have it here. So on page 24, it talks about inflammation, right? So again, you see hers is standard, mine is high. On every page in the molecular report, the orange box is going to tell you which genes they're looking at. The blue box is going to tell you about your specific combination of genes that they're reporting on, and the white is going to give you general information. Now keep in mind, molecular labs is a lab. They are just giving you basic information. It doesn't necessarily adhere to our philosophy, or it doesn't go very deep into understanding. And so that's why we're doing this video series. I'm trying to keep each video under 10 minutes, so there will also be a lot of text associated with each video. When you move over to your bedrock report on inflammation, you will see that there are dietary and supplement recommendations that go along with whichever option you have. Then, when you go to your GAP report, it's going to explain a little bit more about practical application, right? So this is going to talk about what that gene does inside your body in very simple layman's terms. So the rest of the few minutes I have on my video, I'm going to break it down a little bit more scientifically. So there are 4 genes that we're looking at. The first is FADS1, stands for fatty acid desaturase 1. What this does is it metabolizes very specific fatty acids in the body. It is also known, it's been talked about as the vegetarian's gene, because what it tells us is whether or not you can break down AA, which is arachidonic acid found in plants, and make it be usable in your body. Most people, and anyone who has 1 or more SNPs on this, or a C variant or a C protein on this gene, needs to have animal fat. You cannot use plant fats or polyunsaturated fatty acids. We already know that polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs, increase inflammation in people. But if you have this gene, you can't use them at all, right? You are never going to be able to convert them to something usable, and it's going to raise your inflammatory markers. It's also important to note that the FADS1 gene tells us a lot about how you metabolize carbohydrate, because this gene has been associated with other inflammatory and metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and coronary artery disease. All of these things we know come from excess carbohydrate or metabolic insufficiency. Metabolic diseases are directly related to insulin resistance, which I'm going to get to in a bit because you're going to see how this all comes together. The second gene that we're talking about is the FUT2 gene. This is also talked about as the secretor or non-secretor status. Why? Because we're talking about secretions in the body, literally. We're talking about things like human milk production, or the lining of the intestines and the secretions of the moist, hate that word, mucosal tissues in the body. So the lining of the intestines, human milk production, as I already mentioned, this affects the gut flora and the gut microbiome. If you have a mutation on this gene, it can tell us that your gut microbiome is going to be compromised, that you have more of an issue with viruses and bacteria, harder time fighting off illnesses, or that you have a compromised immune system or chronic inflammation throughout the body. Even type 1 diabetes has its basis in inflammation and has been linked to the FUT2 gene. Also associated with FUT2 genes are diseases, GI diseases of that mucosal lining of the intestines, like Chrohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, IBS. I'm going to throw a bunch of studies up too, talking about each one of these genes. The third gene that we're talking about is the adipoq gene, ADIPOQ, or adiponectin. Adiponectin is a protein coding gene. And adiponectin itself is a hormone that is created inside adipose tissue or inside your fat. It is a hormone, and it is associated with insulin sensitivity, or the good use of insulin and regulation of blood sugar. Again, I'm going to explain this in a little bit. And being anti-inflammatory versus pro-inflammatory. So when there is a genetic SNP on this gene and there are low levels of adiponectin, this is associated with metabolic disease, inflammatory diseases like obesity, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, and coronary artery disease. Again, this gene is only expressed in adipose tissue, and it codes similar to collagen 10 and collagen 8. So adiponectin is a hormone and a protein, or it's a coding for a protein that is similar to collagen or a type of collagen. Adipose tissue is also regulated by the thyroid. So we see that this and insulin resistance together with excess carbohydrate intake can and has been linked to hyperthyroidism. The final gene that we're talking about in this section is PPARG, or peroxisome proliferator activator receptor. PPAR gamma, or G, plays a regulatory role in energy homeostasis, causing insulin sensitivity and enhanced glucose metabolism. With a SNP on this gene, again, you are more likely to experience insulin resistance and a host of metabolic diseases associated with that. So I think the most important thing is to talk about what is insulin resistance versus insulin sensitivity, right? So in a perfect body, we are insulin sensitive, meaning we eat carbohydrates, our blood sugar goes up temporarily, our pancreas releases insulin, our blood sugar comes down, excess carbohydrate is released from the body, not needed, right? However, thank you to our standard American diet, very poor information about nutrition over the last 100 years, and a host of processed foods and things that we were never designed to eat, we are now in an insulin resistant state. So insulin resistance means basically that this perfect system of hormones that protect us from getting fat by regulating blood sugar and insulin gets broken. And so in comes carbohydrate, excess carbohydrate is in the body, blood sugar goes up. Our body does not respond properly to the insulin as it is released in regulation of the blood sugar. And so excess blood sugar remains in the bloodstream. When excess blood sugar remains in the bloodstream, we have no choice but to turn it into fat. So when you talk about obesity, you talk about high blood pressure, high triglyceride levels, coronary artery disease, atherosclerosis or calcification of the arteries, you're not talking about fats. You're talking about excess carbohydrate that the body turns into fat. Dietary fat has nothing to do with any of those things, never has and never will. But we've created a unique situation where most everyone in the world right now is insulin resistant instead of insulin sensitive, and this leads to all of these inflammatory diseases. So you'll hear me oftentimes say that there are only really 3 main causes of all disease, and all of them are preventable and curable. One is leaky gut. Everything in our body revolves around the condition of our gut, whether or not the gut microbiome is healthy and whether or not the gut is leaky or perforated. And so when there's leaky gut, things leak into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there. The body attacks itself in order to protect you from you. Number 2 is metabolic disease. All metabolic diseases have their basis in insulin resistance, which we just talked about. And the third is inflammatory diseases. Leaky gut leads to inflammation. Metabolic disease leads to inflammation, and other things lead to inflammation. So those are the 3 main causes of every disease known to man, all of which are controllable through diet, nutrition, and lifestyle, which means that everything that happens to us, we make happen, and everything that happens to us, we can fix. So we will talk about another gene series tomorrow. I hope you guys have a great night.